Hi everyone, this is Elizabeth with World's Cup of Joe, Awaken Your Soul. Welcome to our Soul Love Through Literature mini-series on the classic novel, The Great Gatsby. I had not read this book since I was a teen in high school, so picking it up, I had no idea that I would find a love story that was so reminiscent and has every telltale sign of a twin flame connection. I read the book without bias, and then I watched the most recent adaptation of the film Gatsby to confirm what I already knew, which was that this is a novel based on a twin flame connection. Back to the subject. In reading the book, it was clear as soon as Gatsby was introduced, which wasn't until later into the novel, that he was the push polarity in the twin flame connection. This book is not a long one, and the passages that go into the twin flame connection are not many, but regardless, it is this connection that is the basis of the entire book. Because there are not many passages that center on the relationship of Gatsby and Daisy, this will be a mini-series as opposed to our Sunday Soul Love Through Literature series, which will be over a span of multiple weeks to be able to deep dive into the longer books that explore this connection. How do you tell if a love story in a novel is a twin flame connection? Well, there are distinguishable attributes of a twin flame connection that are representative of only this connection. Let's back up a step. What is a twin flame connection in the most basic, simple to understand terms? Well, it is quite simply one soul that has been split into two and now encompasses two physical bodies. Some mistakenly attribute soulmate relationships to twin flame connections, but they are not even close. Soulmates you can have many of, and they can be romantic or platonic. Soulmates are two separate souls, and although the connections can be extremely meaningful and sometimes even intense, they pale in comparison in intensity to a twin flame connection. Also, soulmates are still based on conditional circumstances. Now, let's contrast this type of relationship to a twin flame connection. First and foremost, a twin flame connection is an energetic one. It is purely based on energy. Twin flames are the purest form of unconditional love because the twin is you. You are them. There are two halves to the connection, the positive and the negative polarity, otherwise known as the push and the pull. The positive polarity is the awakened conscious version in the connection, while the negative will remain asleep and the subconscious half. Each of the two halves also have their own specific defining attributes. The positive polarity, as the awakened twin, gets an addictive energy activated when they meet or sometime thereafter. This addictive energy is extremely intense and consuming, and what's more, it will be an addiction that will remain the rest of the push twin's life. It doesn't go away. But there are ways to manage it. Not only is the addictive energy high with the positive polarity, but they become obsessive about their other self. They'll think about them constantly. Once something called soul recognition occurs, this is when the soul recognizes itself, there is a pull or energetic repellent that occurs in the negative polarity. They physically, mentally, and emotionally cannot handle the addictive energy or mind energies of the push twin. They pull, sometimes indefinitely, and the push twin usually has a dark night of the soul or a death of one's ego. This dark night is something that is a hallmark sign that one is in a twin flame connection. It is excruciatingly painful and often feels debilitating. Everyone's dark night is individual in time and duration, but it is essentially the start of one's awakening in their own spiritual journey. The twin is the catalyst for the push polarity to experience a complete life shift, and nothing in their physical world feels the same once they start their awakening. The only way that a twin reunites is when the push polarity can release mind and align with their soul. A soul connection is just that. Soul draws soul to it. If the push aligns with soul, their twin will return. That is how you know definitively that you are in a twin flame connection. With that background, let's start discussing The Great Gatsby and why this is a twin flame love story. I will attempt to briefly summarize the plot and then go into greater depths of the twin flame relevancy to the story. This is not a story review, but rather a discussion of why I believe that this couple was in a soul connection and my arguments to support that supposition. Plot overview. The Great Gatsby takes place during the Roaring 20s, and the main characters are a narrator named Nick, whose relevancy to this discussion is minor, his cousin Daisy, the negative polarity, and Jay Gatsby, the push polarity. In the beginning of the book, Nick has just moved to a small rental home in New York where he got a job in finance. He is in an area of extreme wealth, with his neighbor across the way, Gatsby, having a huge and extravagant mansion which is always hosting the most lively and boisterous parties. Nick's cousin, the lovely and extremely wealthy Daisy, lives on the opposite side of town in her own fancy mansion. She is married to a man named Tom, an extremely well-off, handsome man who is also a womanizer who is cheating on Daisy. Shortly after Nick's arrival to his new home, he is personally invited to one of the outlandish parties that Gatsby throws. He doesn't understand why he was invited, yet he decides to go. Nick will soon find out that Gatsby's motives for inviting him were to get close to his cousin Daisy. Daisy, it turns out, was Gatsby's love interest over 5 years ago, or as I will conjecture, his twin flame. He wants Nick to help arrange a meeting between the two of them without her husband Tom finding out. Nick agrees to help Gatsby as he has taken a liking to him and has also been made aware of Tom's ongoing infidelity. The first quote I want to start off with in this episode is when Nick first meets Gatsby. I feel like it is relevant because it shows Gatsby is aligned with soul. Keep in mind, his alignment is what allows Daisy to come into his energy a little later in the story. We will find out the complexity of Gatsby's obsession and addiction to Daisy, little by little, as I dissect their soul connection. But I want to start out with a quote that, although Gatsby is still obsessed with Daisy, his energy is balanced enough to get close to her and not repel. First quote, "He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in a life. It faced, or seemed to face, the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just as far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that, at your best, you hoped to convey." Nick. This quote is thought by the narrator Nick. Let's dive deeper into it. He describes Gatsby's smile as one of those rare smiles with the quality of eternal reassurance that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life. That's a powerful description. The use of the word eternal sounds pretty soul-like, doesn't it? And to say you may only come across 1, 4, or 5 times in your entire life? Think about it. How often do you look around and wonder how many others are really awakened? How many people in your own life do you know that are awakened? I know there are only a small handful of people that I can feel soul when I'm near them. Most people, I feel their mind energies dominate. In this line, Nick can feel Gatsby's soul energy through his smile. It was eternal. He goes on to say that it seemed to face the external world and then focus on you with a prejudice in your favor. Think about soul. Soul is unconditional love. When you experience soul highs, you will feel the sentiment of how Nick describes Gatsby. It is seeing the world in all its wonder. But if you're talking to one person, you see them through the eyes of unconditional love or soul. He then continues and says that the look was one where they believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and saw you at your best. This, my loves, is pure soul. When you are in soul, you see others with all their greatness and unlimited potential. This is one of the reasons why Nick was so drawn to Gatsby. It was being seen through the eyes of soul, and it feels amazing. Next quote. Good night. He smiled, and suddenly there seemed to be a pleasant significance in having been among the last to go, as if he had desired it all the time. Good night, old sport. Good night. In this quote, Gatsby is saying goodnight after the party has ended to Nick. Nick recognizes that Gatsby seems happy that he was one of the last guests to leave. I included this quote because it shows Gatsby starting to use Nick as a third party to leak on. Gatsby knows that Nick is Daisy's cousin, and you will find out later that he wanted to get to know Nick better for a good word to be spoken to Daisy on his behalf. For the first half of the book, until Gatsby sees Daisy in person, he absolutely uses Nick as a third party, especially during separation as Gatsby and Daisy were in. It is common to use a third party. The push associates the third party as a gateway to their person, but often they use this person to get their addictive high, and the energy pushes just through the third party that the person cannot come back into their energy. Next quote. Look here, old sport, he broke out surprisingly. What's your opinion of me anyhow? I don't want you to get a wrong idea of me from all these stories you hear. So he was aware of the bizarre accusations that flavored conversations in his halls. I included this quote just to add to my argument of how Gatsby is using Nick as a third party. He has concluded that the way to Daisy is through Nick, and he is determined to show Nick that he is a good guy. Gatsby knows that people talk about him and his past and have made up all kinds of stories and exaggerations about him. Gatsby wants to set the record straight and, of course, put his best foot forward to the one person that may have an impact on getting him reacquainted with his twin. Gatsby goes on to tell Nick about his background and how he came to acquire so much wealth. This next part of the conversation is where I believe that Gatsby divulges to Nick the way that he tried to get over Daisy, followed by what would be his dark night of the soul. Quote 4. After that, I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that had happened to me long ago. Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die. But I seemed to bear an enchanted life. So much about the connection is packed into these 3 little sentences. Gatsby explains how he tried to forget something very sad, which we will later find out was him losing Daisy, and did everything to not think of it. When a push polarity goes through separation, it takes all of our might to try and stop thinking about our person. We turn our energies towards anything hoping that it will make us forget, but nothing works. This is where Gatsby's next line comes in. He looked to the war with great relief, hoping to die. This, I feel, was his dark night. He could no longer go on and wish to die. When we experience our dark night after separation, it is like we don't want to exist. It really is that painful. We are experiencing a kind of death. It is the death of our ego, and it is excruciating. My own dark night, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't do anything. I had the greatest physical pain of my life that accompanied the greatest emotional pain. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't read. I couldn't eat. The only thing that helped slightly was meditation at night. The pain was so intense, and I would find myself sobbing continuously on and off throughout the days. I lost track of how often I did it because it was so frequent. And when I say sobbing, I mean full waterworks on display, an ugly cry sobbing. It wasn't pretty. Next quote. I'm going to make a big request of you today, he said, pocketing his souvenirs with satisfaction. So I thought you ought to know something about me. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there, trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. We will conclude this episode with this important passage. Gatsby is letting Nick know that he has an important request of him. Later, we will find out that it is to set up a meeting between him and Daisy. This explains his next line, where he tells Nick he wanted to give him information about him. But listen to what he says next, because it is a huge indication of the insecurity and perhaps trigger that Gatsby feels in this connection. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. We find out later in the story that Gatsby was not wealthy and was not a proper match for Daisy when they were together. He spent separation gaining wealth and making a name for himself, all for one purpose: to be deemed worthy to be with Daisy. Isn't that a hallmark trait of a push polarity, to think that we are not good enough and to do anything and everything to try and be worthy to be by our twin side? It is not even to be on their level, because push polarities rarely get to that place of confidence, but to be worthy enough, just enough. And this is what Gatsby is conveying. He has gone through all this effort in gaining his wealth, buying fancy things, meeting important people, all for the time that he can see Daisy again and prove his worthiness to her. And then his last comment is that he drifts among strangers trying to forget the sad thing that happened. Again, he alludes to his separation with Daisy without ever coming right out and saying it. Listen to the seemingly obsessive way he is describing this connection. He has fallen in love with her. He realizes he's not good or wealthy enough for her, and they go through separation. He spends time in separation trying to become good enough for her. His life changes. He at one point wants to die, and now here he is trying to convince Daisy's random, ordinary cousin that he, the great Gatsby, is not just some nobody. This paragraph says so much to this connection. This is where I will conclude this episode. I hope you join us again next week and see what happens with Gatsby and Daisy and their twin flame connection.